Sweet. All right, so let's take a look at the solution for the TypeScript view swapping. So in this one, we can see where those data attributes could also come into play. So the way that our HTML looks like, we have these tabbed containers, where these are those three little tabs that you were clicking between, where you clicked on the HTML, you clicked on the CSS, you click on the JavaScript. So we have all three tabs in our tab container. And they also have this data view attribute. And this data view attribute is we're using it to know which view we want to swap to, essentially. So that way I know if I click on the HTML tab, I want to go to see all of the HTML content. If I click on that CSS tab, I know that I want to view all the view stuff related to the CSS. And the same thing with the JavaScript. We can see that we repeat that same data view attribute on the actual views. So this is how we're kind of using those custom attributes to pass information from our HTML and our JavaScript so that I can access that information. So now I know that if I click on this tab and it has the data view of HTML, I want to show all the other content that also has that data view HTML. So this is how we're kind of linking them together. So we'll have the rest of our HTML, we'll have our view container. Inside of our view containers, we'll have each individual view, which will only consist of the content for that view. So we'll have the image of the little language. And we'll have the little content that just appears underneath. And then the same thing for all the other views. We're only going to have one view at a time. So all of our other views are going to get that hidden class. So that way we're only seeing that one view at once. Any questions on the HTML before we go and take a look at the TypeScript? Okay. Let's take a look at the TypeScript. I'm going to install all the dependencies that I need as well. All right. So in our TypeScript, we queried for our tab container. This is what I'm going to be clicking on. So this is, I'm using event delegation. So rather than have to query for each of my tabs individually and listen for a click on each tab individually, I'm utilizing event delegation. So I just have to add that one event listener to the parent and it'll capture all the events that happen on its children. So I query for the parent, which is our tab container. I also queried for all of our tabs and all of our views. Since I'm going to have multiple elements with that data view attribute that are tabs, and I'll have multiple views, I want to query for all of them. So that way I can access all of my different tabs and all of my different views. We'll check to make sure that the tab container actually exists. So that way I can add an event listener to it and TypeScript won't get mad at me. The next thing we'll do is we'll create a variable for our event targets. In this case, since if I click on a tab container, I know, let's open this up in the browser. So since I know I'm going to be clicking on one of these tabs, that CSS or that JavaScript, I'm going to be clicking on one of these div elements right here. So I asserted our event target as an HTML div element because I know that when I click on, it's going to be one of those things. Yeah.
Okay, can we use, I noticed we can use the HTML elements too. It works for me to get matches.
Yeah, it's just HTML element. It doesn't know what kind of element. So there may be certain properties that only exist on div elements. So you want to kind of be as specific as possible. So HTML element would work. But if it can only ever be one type of HTML element, then you should say what HTML element that'll be. Because certain properties change depending on which element. Like a form has certain properties, whereas a button has certain properties. So an HTML element won't account for those. So you kind of want to say specifically what kind of element it'll be. Yeah. So we create our variable for our event target. Now I want to make sure, since I'm using event delegation, I want to make sure that whatever I clicked on was an actual tab. Since I have the event listener on my tab container, you can see if I click all the way over here, you can see the event is still technically firing. Because since I have the event on the tab container, as long as I click anywhere in that tab container, the event is still gonna fire. So even if I click over here, it'll fire, but if I click over here, I don't want to swap to any views because I didn't click on an actual tab. So what we did is we used the matches method to say, oh, as long as my event target, whoever I clicked on, as long as it matches a class with the class of tab. So all matches is doing is it's checking to see if I were to use this CSS selector in a query selector, it would be able to find this element. So it's saying if I did a document.query selector for a class of tab, it would match that element. So it's essentially saying, are these the same? Would this CSS selector refer to this element? That's all that this is asking for. So in this case, it would, because if I did a query for an individual tab, that would be in my tab up here, that would be one of these guys. And these are the things that I'm clicking on. So I'm just making sure that whatever I clicked on was one of these elements with that class of tab. Next, after the click has happened, I verified that it matched the tab. I then need to loop over my tabs so that I can change these styling. So I'm going to loop over my node list of all of my tabs. I'm going to compare the current tab in the node list to the tab that was clicked on. So if the current tab in my node list is the same tab that was clicked on, then that means that's the tab that I want to switch to. So then I want to give it a class of active because we have some CSS that's specifically being applied to that class. Whereas then if the current element that I clicked on does not match the element that I'm on in my loop, then I just set the class name to tab. So that way it doesn't have that active class. So that way it doesn't get those styles that's only being applied to the active like so. You can see when an element has the active class, it'll get a new color, it'll get a border color, and that's how we're kind of creating that kind of focus effect is by having that extra class. So I only want to make sure that whatever element it was that I clicked on actually has that active tab. Otherwise, I'll just give it the normal tab. And in a little bit, we'll step through it in a debugger and we'll see it all kind of come together as well. Yeah.
Just question, for line 10 and line from 10 to 12, for me, what I did, I put event target was clicked, and then I did else was not clicked. So
What do you mean by was clicked?
The button. So when you hit the button, when you hit the event target, so when you hit on CSS or HTML or types or like JavaScript, it's gonna like output on the console log, the tab was clicked. But for you here is line 11, I can see you only put return nothing. So
I'm confused on what you're asking.
so from here, you see like matches here?
Yep.
So on console log, what I did, I put console log event target was.
Well, we don't console logs. Console logs are only for testing. I shouldn't use a console log in an if statement.
So
A console log is only for me to check the value of something in the inspector. JavaScript does not run console logs and if statements. So you cannot put a console log in an if statement. If you did a console log in an if statement, like if.
no, not like this. I'm saying it in the body.
Oh, you're saying in the body of the if statement, okay. Well, yeah, if you console log, then you're just logging. But if whatever I clicked on wasn't a tab, I want to kick them out of the function because I don't want to perform anything else. Because if they didn't click on a tab, I don't want to do anything because this whole function is related to swapping views. So that's why I put return is because if something I clicked on wasn't one of those tabs, kick them out of the function. It'd be the same as if I just said it does match, and then I just moved all of this code inside of the if statement.
So for me, I could have put was clicked and else.
What do you mean was clicked?
In the tab, the HTML.
I know, but what are you checking for when you say that you're checking for something was clicked?
The tab, the event target.
Yeah, but event target what?
Targeting the tab, this because when I did
What do you mean targeting the tab? You just said if event target equals tab at tab index?
I did equal event. I did event target that matches.
Yeah, so you use matches.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
So you didn't
yeah.
check if it was clicked. You
Yeah.
just checked if what element was clicked matches the tab.
Yeah, this is what I did. So I did not like mention matches. So if the event target matches the tab.
Yep,
I put
all your
console
code inside
log.
the if statement.
Yeah, inside
Yeah,
this.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I know it's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
big.
No, that's fine. It's just a different way of doing it. In this case, I want to check. I want to check for the only, like, the worst case. If something wasn't a tab, then this function is pointless. I don't want them to do anything, so I just kick them out. So after this line, I can verify that as long as whatever my code is on line 14, I'm working with a tab. So it's just a different way of writing it. I can put all of my code inside of an if statement, or I can check for the one thing I don't want to happen, kick them out, and then I could just have all my
Return
code
this line,
outside of
return
if statements.
nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this a good example of handling edge cases, like what you did, or?
No, I wouldn't say
really?
not handling edge cases. Like handling edge cases is more so like you try to remove an item from an array, but what if your array is empty? If you try to call in a method on the array, then you might get an error saying, well, the array is already empty. So it's like, those are kind of edge cases. You write an algorithm, but what if the data that I gave you has like, you know, mixed capitals, or those are edge cases. Yeah. Awesome. So we'll loop over the tabs. We'll check over Kaya.
So is there any benefit of doing what you did? Like, or I mean, what we did was, of course, we put like the entire code in the if statement. If event or target matches the tab, that is what we did. So, I mean, is there any difference in like the performance or anything?
Not functionally, no. Just I would argue readability. Because there's something called, like, I forget the exact phrase. I think it's like the triangle of doom, or like the triangle of death or something. But it's like your code, because if you keep doing if statements, it's gonna keep getting indented, right? And then your code can get to a point where it just gets so indented that it kind of like starts like all the way over here. And so I would say that this is quote unquote better for readability purposes, because I don't have to read all of my code inside of an if statement, and it kind of indents it and it kind of all concises and puts it together. Functionally, there's no difference between doing what I did and what you did. It's just a matter of readability and how you like to organize and structure your code.
Okay, thank you.
So we loop over our tabs. We'll change the class to make sure that they're active or not. We'll then access the dataset property of the event target. So since what we click on is going to be a tab, they're going to have these data view properties. Whenever you have a data attribute, you can, one of the ways that you can access it is via this data set property. So every element is going to have a data set property. And that data set property is just going to consist of all of the different data attributes you had. So since I had data view, I can do dataset.view, and it would give me the value of what that attribute was. If I had data name, you know, and I put Sean, well, then now I could do dataset.name, and I can access whatever name I set to that data attribute. So data set is one of the ways of how we can access all of those data attributes. So now I got the data set from my views. So our view container, each view has these data views. So I got the data view from each of our individual views. Oh, sorry, from what I clicked on. But now I need to loop over our views, and I need to compare the data view of the tab to the data view of the actual view that I want to swap to. So we loop over all of our views. I compare the current view that I'm on in my loop to the view of which tab was clicked. So our event target, since I'm clicking on a tab, This is why they both needed to have those data view attributes, right? Because I needed to compare the tab to the actual view that I wanted to swap to. So I access the data view of whatever tab was clicked. I loop over all of my views. I compare them. If they are not equal, then I want to give them the class of hidden. So that way I hide them on the web page. Otherwise, if they are equal, then that means that is the view that I want to swap to. Then I want to remove that class of hidden. So then I just give it the class of view. And this is what makes it actually visible on the web page. So let's add a debugger, because I think we could step through this and we can see it in action. All right. So I just clicked on a tab. Let me refresh just to make sure. So I clicked on, let's do JavaScript. Let me move these cameras. All right. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to create our event target variable. In this case, who is my event target?
The tab,
What tab?
the HTML or CSS. with
Yeah,
that.
whatever one I clicked on. In this case, I clicked on the JavaScript tab. So my event target is going to be referring to this JavaScript tab right here, because that's what I clicked on. So we'll create that variable. You see when I hover over event target, I'm accessing that div tab. If I were to, let's put this on the right, that may be easier to see. So when I hover over my event target, you can see it's highlighting that tab over there on the left, that JavaScript tab, because that's the one that I interacted and clicked on. I'm going to check to make sure that what I clicked on actually matches that CSS selector of the class of tab. In this case, it will, since you can see that it has that class of tab. Now I'm going to begin my loop. So now I want to loop over all of my views, or all of my tabs, so that I can now start to change their styling. I clicked on JavaScript, so I no longer want my HTML tab to look like it's the one in focus. I want my JavaScript tab to look like it's the one in focus. So we'll start our loop at 0, since that's that first index. We'll loop over the full length of our tabs node list, and then we'll increment each time. Now I'm going to compare the current tab that I'm on in my loop, which in this case is going to be HTML since it's the first one. I'm going to check to see if it's equal to the same tab that I clicked on. In this case, it won't be, since I clicked on JavaScript and I'm currently on HTML. So this if statement is going to be false, which means my else is going to kick in, which means I'm only going to give it the class of tab. So I'll move on. Now this line's going to run. And now that it lost that class of active, you can see that these styles have changed. And we can now see that that HTML tab no longer looks like it's in focus, because now we currently have no tabs that are active. We'll move on to the next tab in the node list. We'll check to see if that one is equal to the one that I clicked on. It was not, because this one's CSS and I clicked on JavaScript. So again, we'll just make sure that it only has that class of tab. We'll move on. Now we'll check if the next tab in our loop is going to be the same one as the one that I just clicked on. In this case, it will be, because now we're on the JavaScript one. So now our if statement is going to be true. We're now assigning the active class to the current class name of the tab. And now you'll see that that JavaScript tab is now going to get a whole bunch of new styles. And now we can see that that text color changed. It has that new border. Our loop is now going to end because I've now reached the amount of indexes that is the same as my length. So we've now looped over all the tabs. So now I've changed the tab styling, but now I need to actually change the content, my actual view. So you can see if we change all the JavaScript tab styling, but I'm still seeing my HTML. So now we need to do the same kind of logic before our views. So I'm going to access the current view of my event target. So you can see when I hover over data set, this is showing me all of those data properties that exist on the current element. Right now, it only has one property, which is view. And we can see that it has the value of JavaScript. So when I created the view name variable, the view name variable is oh, I didn't mean to hit play. I shouldn't have done that. Click on this. Let's just get situated again. There we go. So now we can see my view name is JavaScript because that was the one that I was clicked on. And now we're gonna repeat our loop, but now we're gonna do it over the views. I've changed my tabs, but now I need to change the actual view. So we'll start with the first view. Let's begin our loop. I'm now going to access my current view in my node list. And then I want to get its data view attributes, since all of my views have this data view attribute. So I want to get the current data view attribute of the view that I'm on in my loop. And I want to compare this value to the value of whatever tab I clicked on was, which in this case is going to be the JavaScript one. So we'll go back over here. So now the first one, they're not equal because the first tab or view I was on was HTML, but what I clicked on was JavaScript. So now it's going to get a class name of hidden. Now we can see that our HTML content is no longer appearing on the page because now all of our views have a hidden class, which is applying display none. So now they're no longer being visible. I move on to my next view. I will get that view's data view attribute, which in this case should be CSS. And then I'll compare that to the view name that I clicked on, which in this case, they're not true since I'm on CSS and I clicked on was JavaScript. So we'll make sure that it has that class name of hidden. So we still don't see anything. We now move on to our last view, which will be the JavaScript. I'll compare that tab of views data view attribute to the one that I clicked on in the tabs. Now my else kicks in. So now I'm only applying view and it doesn't get the class of hidden as well. So now we'll see our JavaScript view will come into play. So this is where we can see kind of the power of that data attributes of how we're kind of passing information from our HTML to our JavaScript, but also how we can dynamically change what's visible on the page via JavaScript. I don't need a whole nother HTML file just to be able to show different content. I can just use JavaScript and CSS to dynamically kind of change these styles in what shows and doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, but we can, there's like a simpler way than using the data set. It's similar to how you showed us, like, and we only use like one for loop, and then inside it we can do it tab active and view index, we say it's view, and then else we say hidden. So it's gonna be like faster than doing data set, right?
What do you mean?
So we can view the content, and instead of using data set, we can use similar to how you showed us in the Twitter and the bun. You remember like how we switch?
What do you mean? I'm not sure I'm following.
The
If I didn't access the data set,
Yeah,
how would I know what view I want to switch to?
we can use the view index dot class name equal view, and else we can put hidden, similar to how you showed us in previous problem.
But I need to know which view I want to swap to.
Yeah, we
So
can.
that's why I need the data view
We
attribute.
can use the index.
But that doesn't tell me which view I want to swap to. How do I know that HTML is first? What if HTML is third? What if someone goes in and changes my HTML and they reorder it? And now,
Yeah, it works for me.
I know, but like you don't want to listen based off of indexes because indexes can change. You cannot guarantee that the first tab is always going to stay the first tab. Someone may change it at some point. So we want to write our JavaScript in a way that will dynamically always work regardless of the order, which is why I need to use data set because I can't just listen for index.
So this is why we're using data set.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought like, okay, we can use the index similar way.
It could, I mean, if you're the only person working on it, you could, if the first index is, HTML, you could. But I would say that's bad practice because you don't want to write your code in a way that forces you to keep that structure. Because what if your client says, I don't want that. I want this here. I want this here. Well, now you have to rewrite your HTML and you have to rewrite your JavaScript. Whereas then if you wrote your JavaScript in a way to account for that, you only need to change your HTML.
So when using data and this customized property, we can like, we don't need to change.
Anytime you just need to pass information from HTML to JavaScript,
Oh,
we use that data.
That's what we're doing pretty much. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you very much. Thanks.
Let's quickly go over the quiz questions. Noah, can you tell me what is the event.target?
It's targeting the Java, the element object
Mhm.
triggered this event.
So the event target is whoever was interacted with that triggered the event. So if I was listening for a click event, who actually did I click on? Who actually was responsible for firing the event? Trey, what is the effect of setting an element to display none?
It removes the element from the web page. More than it's not just visible, but it no longer occupies space in the layout.
Exactly. Yeah. So not only does it make it so that it's not visible, it makes it so that it removes it from the actual full web page. So from the document flow. So if I go back to my hidden class, let's say rather than display none, let's say I did visibility hidden. So I'm not using display none. I'm only using visibility hidden. And you can see my view is much longer. I have all of this space down here. Watch what happens when I click on CSS now. Let's say play. And now you can see I have this empty space right here, and then I have CSS right here. So visibility hidden just visibly hides it on the web page, but it's still taking up space. Display none will make it so that it's not visible, but that it also gets removed from the page. So the rest of my content goes and fills up that available space. It's like when we did position absolute and the rest of our content kind of jumped up to go fill in that available space. It's the kind of the same thing here. When you give something display none, you're literally almost like you're removing it from the document. So the rest of the elements will no longer know about it, and they're going to go fill in that available space. Rukaya, what does the element.matches method take as an argument, and what does it return?
So it takes the name of the element and returns a Boolean.
Yeah, so rather than the name of the element, I would say a CSS selector. It doesn't need to be, in this case, we used it with a class, but we could also have used it with an ID. We could have also used it with the actual element name or the tag name, but just any CSS selector. And then yes, it would return a Boolean indicating whether or not this CSS selector does match that object that called it. Yeah.
So if we use like a object element like tab name, it's not gonna work from HTML, right?
Object element.
So if we don't create a CSS selector for the object element on HTML.
Well, every element has a CSS selector, right? Like a div, the way that I would select this in CSS, div.
Yeah, I mean, like if we take it directly from HTML, like you just like
The element name, that
Yeah.
is your CSS selector. But if you need a more specific one, then you'd probably give it a class.
Yeah.
Or you'd give it an ID. But you can just use the element name. That is a valid CSS selector. Caroline, how can I retrieve the value of an element's attribute?
By using the get attribute method.
Yeah, so we could use the get attribute method. So we can see that I use that right here with data view, but you can use it with any valid attribute. So if you want to get the SRC attribute, if you want to get the type attribute, any valid attribute, you can use get attribute to get the value. Noah, at what steps would it have been helpful to log things to the console?
Yeah, it's at the well, when it matches, so we would check if the what we tab is matches the it matches the result. Like if we tab on the HTML, it matches, okay, this tab was clicked.
Yeah.
Or like testing it, the testing with what we got from the query selector, if it's the right thing we got selected.
Yeah.
From the DOM.
Yep, no, all great examples. Pretty much every step of the way. At all steps, whenever we're programming, it's useful to log things. Whenever I have a variable, I want to know what that variable's value is, I can log it. If I want to check my logic to make sure that my logic's working, I can console log whatever that is. But just whenever I want to get an idea of how my code's working and what it's looking like, then that would be a good time to log. Trey, if I wanted to add another tab and view to my HTML, but I didn't use event delegation, how would I have to write my TypeScript instead?
I said nothing as long as the HTML is structured the same. Because
Well, if I wasn't using event delegation, how would I know what tab I want to go to?
okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So in this case, if I didn't use event delegation, then I would have to add an event listener to every single tab. So that's essentially what the question is asking is, let's say I now wanted to go add another tab. So I want to go add a GoLang tab. Well, if I wasn't using event delegation, I now need to go update my HTML to go add the new tab. I now need to query for it in my JavaScript. I need to add an event listener to it, and then I need to repeat all that same code. Whereas by using event delegation, since it's already going to be listening on its parent, all I need to do is update my HTML and my JavaScript will still fire the event and work in the same way, since its parent is going to be capturing all those events. Yeah.
So the parent will act as a delegation as
It's just rather than adding an event listener to 5 elements, you can only add one event listener to the parent. And it would capture events on its children.
I mean, like that represents other children, right?
Doesn't represent, it captures it. If I listen for an event on a parent, if something happens to its children, the parent will still find out about it.
The bubble effect.
Yes, the bubble effect. It's like you're a minor, right? You make a mistake, your parents are gonna find out about it. Whether they're the ones that caused it or not, they're gonna find out. And then Rukaya, if you didn't use a loop to conditionally show or hide the views in the page, how would our TypeScript code be written instead?
So we would have to access each element individually from the node list by its index and write a conditional statement for each of those elements.
Exactly. We'd have to have a whole bunch of conditional statements, or maybe we're like, if tab at 0.data.view is equal to HTML, then do this, else, and you just have to have this big old mess of all of these kind of mishmash conditional statements. Awesome. I know it was a little bit speedy, but I think we talked about all the main things that I wanted to. Any final questions about view swapping? You're gonna get a lot of practice with it this week. The project that you're gonna be working on, you're gonna have 2 different views that you need to swap through. So you'll get a lot more practice with it in this week. Anything about this before we move on? All right. And the next one we'll take a look at is TypeScript and JSON. So let's look at the code for that one. All right. So here is the solution for the TypeScript and JSON. So the first and foremost, we have an array of objects. So we have this array of objects that we assign to the variable books. We just added a log for our books, and then we got the type of those books. Since we have an array of objects, if we want to send something via JSON, we need to stringify it. So we need to convert it to a JSON string. So what the stringify method does is it will take some sort of a data structure. In this case, it's going to be my array of objects, and it's going to convert that into a JSON string. So now books JSON is going to be a JSON string. This right here, this is how you would create a JSON string manually. So when I call stringify, it's going to do this automatically for me under the hood. But when it comes to JSON, it's very important the syntax of how you use the quotes. So if you notice when we created the JSON string manually, on the outside, it has single quotes, and then on the insides, it uses double quotes. So if you ever had to create a JSON string manually, which you don't really ever need to, because we have that stringify method, but we just kind of wanted to show you the syntax. This is how you would have to create it manually, is you have to wrap the outer object or string in single quotes. And then for all strings inside of the string, you would have to use double quotes. And that's all that is doing. We'll console log this again, and we'll get the type trait. I'll get to in a second. And then on line 34, we access that JSON string, and then we parse it. So we essentially have two main methods. We have stringify, and then we have parse. Stringify is taking a data structure, and it's converting it into a string. Parse is taking a string, and it's converting it back into its normal data structure. Trey?
So when I created that manual string,
Mhm.
if I began like I started with student number 001,
Mhm.
whenever I did that, it would tell me, hang on just a second here. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read this. In the console, it'd say uncaught syntax error, expected number or unexpected number. But if I did like a 101, it worked fine.
Yeah, I think someone else ran into that once before too. Let me see if I can reproduce that. Yeah, I did run into that once before. I forgot the exact issue. 0 JSON string.
Wow, zero string.
Gotcha. So it seems to be a disconnect in between how JSON handles numbers and how JavaScript handles numbers. A leading 0, I guess, indicates something called an octal number in JavaScript. And JSON doesn't officially support those. So I guess that's why you can't have it start with a 0 and you have to start it with a 1. Generally, when you're storing numbers, you generally wouldn't ever really store numbers like this to begin with. You would usually just start it with 1. Awesome. Let's take a look at this in the browser so we can see what this looks like. Oh. So our first console log is just my array of books. So I console logged my array of objects, and we can see that the type of that is an object. The next thing we did is we stringified that array of objects, and then we logged that string, and we got the type of. So we can see here is my JSON string. The console won't actually print string quotes. So we don't actually see the single quotes on the outside. You can see the same thing here on the student JSON. It doesn't actually show those outer quotes, but this is a string. And the way that we can verify is we can see that the type of books JSON is a string. So we can see that this is a JSON string, which is an array of objects. Here is our manually created JSON string. We also logged the type of that. And then we parsed our manual JSON string, and then we logged that, and we can see that we got an object, and the type of was an object. So when we stringify something, we're taking the original data structure, converting it to a string. When we parse something, we're taking a string and we're converting it back into its original form. So in this case, it converted it back into its object. Any initial questions? We'll go over the quiz questions, and then I have one other visual example that we'll kind of see. But any initial questions before we go over that? Right. Let's answer the quiz questions then real quick. Caroline, what is JSON?
It is a lightweight, like a data format.
Mhm.
It's used to interchange, so you can send it easier.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lightweight data interchange format. It's kind of become the language to use whenever you need to transmit data. So you can use it to send data across applications via networks. As JavaScript developers, it's really handy because it's already in a format that we work with objects and that object literal syntax. So it's handy for us as JavaScript developers. But nowadays, pretty much every programming language has support for JSON. So pretty much every programming language will use JSON as one of its default ways of exchanging data. You may have also heard of XML.
Yeah.
XML is kind of like an old data format that people used to use to exchange data. JSON's kind of the more modern way that a lot of will place XML.
I don't know why because in school they teach you XML, they don't teach you JSON.
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know, but I think there are some functional reasons why sometimes you actually have to use XML via JSON. Off the top of my head, I'm not fully
Yeah.
familiar with those, but I think that there are specific reasons why you would actually have to use XML. Noah, can you tell me what are serialization and deserialization?
Serialization is like converting the object into string, series of string, right? That's
Yep.
why serialization.
Yep. And then what is deserialization?
It is it like the dot parse, similar to dot parse, like converting it back to original state?
Exactly, yeah. So serialization is the process of taking a data structure and converting it into a stream of bytes so that we can then transmit and send those bytes across a network. Deserialization is the process of taking those bytes and then reconfiguring them back into their original form or their original structure. Going off of that, Sheree, why are serialization and deserialization useful?
I just said they allow complex data structures or objects to be converted into a string format that can be easily stored and transmitted across networks or shared between different systems.
Yeah, no, 100%. So they're useful because they allow us to store and transmit data in a format that can both be easily read by humans, but also be easily read by computers, which makes it really easy for us to exchange data across different applications, different systems, and just an easy way to retrieve all that data. Rukaya, how can I actually serialize a data structure into a JSON string using TypeScript?
With the JSON stringify method.
Yep, so we can use that stringify method. And then Caroline, how can I deserialize a JSON string?
With a parse method.
Parse method, yeah. So we can stringify to serialize, we can parse to deserialize. Awesome, I'll have a quick little visual to showcase how this kind of works, but before I do, any initial questions? All right, well, let me stop my share real quick because I need to redo my.
The last one really quick.
Okay. All right. So we got this little clip from the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory movie. I think it does a good visual way of showcasing how the process of serialization and deserialization actually work. So let me make sure the sound works. Okay, so I don't want it to.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, let me double check. This is going the right place. So. Don't work. Okay, no, I apologize. We're gonna hear a little bit of an echo, but Go on back. Sound. Let me mute this actually.
We can't hear anything. Sean?
All right. So, remote, are you able to hear the sound okay?
No, we couldn't
Oh,
hear.
you can't hear the sound? Stop share. Share sound. Maybe I have to share the application window itself.
Stop, don't come back.
Can you hear it now? Okay, perfect. Let me repeat this. Get this cameras out of the way again. All right.
Yes, I'm sure I could. I'm pretty sure I could. But it might have some messy results.
Look at me, I'm gonna be the first person in the world to be sent by television.
Hey, get away from that thing!
Stop, don't come back.
Lights, camera, action!
Mike! Where are you?
So currently Mike TV has been serialized. So he was converted from his original form, which was a human. He's now in a stream of bytes. That bytes are getting sent over the network.
In a million pieces.
Mike! Are you there?
Don't look shiny here. Watch the screen.
We're going to deserialize Mike TV.
A million pieces take a long time to put together.
Oh, where are they?
There's definitely something coming through.
Is it Mike?
Well, it's hard to tell, but I...
Oh!
Our little group is getting smaller by the minute.
Look at me, everybody. I'm the first person in the world to be sent by television.
There we go. And now Mike TV has been parsed back into his original form. So I think it's just a nice little visual way of how we can kind of see that process working. When we stringify something, we're taking an existing data structure, converting it into a stream of bytes that we can transmit over a network. So that way, once it reaches its desired location, we can transmit that back into its original data structure.
Yeah, yeah, this is why I was like a string, each character is a 1 byte. If you have like a word, it's like a
Yeah.
4 bytes, so
Yeah.
it's gonna be, but, and the integer is like 4 bytes, so is it? That's like the number, instead of using a number which is 4 bytes, we can use one string as a 1, which is 8, which is 1 byte.
Mhm.
Instead of using 4, we can use 1. This is why I like, yeah, it's really good.
Any other questions about JSON? All right, we still have one more Q&A we gotta get through, but I don't want to rush it. I don't think we'll get through it in 9 minutes. So what we can do is we could go to lunch a little bit early. Rukaya, if you wouldn't mind staying on, and we could take a look at your system. So we go to lunch now. We'll come on back at 1:30. As soon as we get back at 1:30, we'll have our Q&A on the local storage, and then I'll start introducing the project. We'll go from there. So I'll see everyone back here at 1:30, and then Rukaya, let me get you pulled into a room.
Got 130.